honestly, I didn't expect these to sound nearly as good as they do, which isn't to say that I expected them to sound bad. It's just that they sound really good. The Wharfedale Aura 2, which come out a couple months ago. After I reviewed the MoFi Source Point 8, the contact that I have at MoFi Distribution, who also distributes other brands, we got to talking about some of the other things that they have, and I asked if I could review the Aura 2 from the Wharfedale line because, honestly, I just thought it would be a nice change of pace. It's a three-way mini tower speaker. I mean, it's not like a full-size tower speaker, but it's not a bookshelf. Well, I guess they consider it a bookshelf, but it's bigger than a normal-size bookshelf. It's a pretty decent-sized speaker. It's a three-way, and I thought, well, I'm going to try that out because I don't think I've tested a true three-way speaker in a while. Most of them are like 2.5-way. Well, except for the JBL 698, which I just reviewed. But other than that, bookshelf size, not so much. I got these in. Number one, off the bat, they look beautiful. I mean, it's just gorgeous. They come in 3 different colors. The walnut finish that I have, a white and a black, and there's all a gloss. So those of you who really don't like gloss finishes, these probably aren't going to be for you, but I'm telling you, the performance is certainly there. Retails for $2,500 a pair, in my opinion, worth every bit of that. I think they could probably get away with asking a little bit more. Let's hope that they don't. So I set them up in my room. I do the whole thing. You guys know by now, about 10 feet away, 6 feet away. I move around, listen to different positions, toe in, toe out. This is what I settled on. About 2 feet off the wall. Closer than that, and the mid-range suck out was just too much. I didn't really care for that. Further away than that, at least in my room, the mid bass would kind of taper off a little bit too much. It wasn't quite on an even keel with the mid range, and I mean just barely. I mean just barely. Nothing that 1 decibel of tonal balance wouldn't fix. But I'm letting you know that about 2 feet away, I think that worked best for me. And this is what I mean. 2 feet away, or roughly 60 centimeters off the back wall. It makes me happy. Look, that's not me, but that's somebody who's happy. That's approximately the position that I would recommend that I found the best results with. Aiming wise, directly at me was a little bit too much on the top end, but toed out just a little bit. Maybe like 10 degrees, maybe 15 degrees, maybe not much more than that though, was a good balance of the higher frequency sounding not mellow, but not bright, because there is a kick up around 13 kilohertz that shows up in the data. And I heard it in my listening where sometimes it can be sharp or shrill, but it really did vary from track to track. If a track happened to have something on there, then it accentuated it more. And I didn't really like that. But having said that, those are the only 2 cons that I have. And I'm starting off with the cons because get ready, the list of pros is about to just roll out. Pro number 1, the output capability on these speakers is phenomenal. Now, when listening to some music, for example, some rap that has a 30 hertz tone in it, 35 hertz tone in it, I'm exceeding the capability of that 6.5-inch midwoofer. But for the most part, I didn't have any issues with the speaker not playing loud enough. At 10 feet away, I was rocking out at about 100 decibels on average for the pair of speakers in a room. Not breaking a sweat, no audible distortion, no strain in the upper high frequency. And I have something fairly recent that I can reference back to that was problematic, which was the KEF LS50 Meta. Now, that speaker is not supposed to be an SPL monster, so I'm not really saying that you should compare those two the way that I'm about to, but I'm giving you a reference. If you look at the data from the KEF LS50 Meta, you can see that multi-tone distortion goes pretty high, above about 1 kilohertz. Well, the data for this speaker looks really clean in terms of distortion, which backs up what I heard. I was able to listen to the speaker extremely loudly without having any kind of shrill sounds to it, like I did with the LS50 Meta. Not taking away from the Meta, good speaker, but just giving you kind of a reference point here. The speaker has an extremely wide soundstage, not like plus or minus 90 degrees, not as wide maybe as some other speakers that I've tested. For example, the Philharmonic BMR, I think, was maybe a little bit wider, not a whole lot wider, but a little bit wider. But this particular speaker was still very wide at about plus or minus 70 degrees horizontally, but it still maintained very good imaging and focus. The linearity of the speaker is fantastic. You know, I mentioned that breakup at around 13 kilohertz, but aside from that, this speaker is almost ruler flat. I'm going to show you the data in a little bit, and you're going to be like, whoa, that's impressive. The bass in room, 40 hertz is not a problem. And I would say that for some people who maybe don't listen to content that gets below 40 hertz, like generally if your music content is not going into the orchestral type sounds where you're shooting off cannons, or you're doing any kind of rocking out at extremely high levels with rap music, for example, then you might not need a subwoofer. Dare I say you might not need a subwoofer. Of course, your room is going to contribute majorly to that. But in my case, the majority of the music that I listen to, I would have been fine if I had not had a subwoofer. The imaging and separation, I just briefly mentioned that. That is really good. I mean, the images are very precise. I was listening to Hot for Teacher by Van Halen. I'm sure many of you know that song. The thing I like about that song when trying to demo it on speakers is that if there is not, if the speaker's not very capable of imaging well, and really that kind of boils down to matching of the pairs of the speakers and what the response is at the seated position between the left and the right. If the speaker is not set up well in the room, or the speaker doesn't match between the pair, then what'll happen is you'll get a lot of muddiness between the different instruments. Generally, that's the case for a lot of them, but the drums, the opening drums and the cymbals and the hi-hats and the kick, all of that makes it hard for you to pinpoint accuracy, define, say, here's the cymbal, here's the hi-hat, the kick drum sounds full and robust, but it's also not taking away from the other sounds that are going on. Also, part of that will be multi-tone distortion. So if there's a lot of intermodulated distortion, then the lower bass can muddy up the mid-range. I didn't really see that or hear that in my listening test. And the bottom line for me is that this is probably one of the better speakers that I've tested to date. And I have a feeling that it might break my top 5 of all time. I'm kind of wondering, is it going to bump the Linton, the Wharfedale Linton 85? I don't know, man. This speaker's firing on all cylinders. I don't know, just 100% subjectively, at $2,500 a pair, I don't know that I know of a better speaker, at least in its class size, or its size class, honestly. But you guys tell me when we look at the data. You let me know if you agree or disagree. Is that recency bias talking? So with that information aside, let's go ahead and just start looking at some of the data, because I think you guys are going to be really impressed by what I saw, and it'll explain some of what I heard as well. Before we do that, though, I'm going to give you a couple quick specs from the manufacturer while I show you this little video. It is a 3-way design. It features a 27 by 90 millimeter AMT tweeter, a 4-inch mid-range, and a 6.5-inch mid-woofer. Frequency response spec is 42 to 22,000 hertz. Recommended amplifier power is 25 to 150 watts. Sensitivity is spec'd at 88 decibels, and the impedance is spec'd at 6 ohm. It is a ported design. The port actually comes out of the bottom of the speaker. It doesn't come out from the back of it. It comes out from the bottom of it, which is really kind of neat and somewhat unusual. As always, the data that you're about to see is captured using my Klippel near-field scanner. It's a state-of-the-art robotic device that allows me to get anechoic data in a non-anechoic environment that allows us to understand what the speaker itself is doing before you put it into the room. That way, if you need to make any adjustments to the sound in your room, you have a better idea of where to start. Do you start with the room, or do you start with the speaker? First off, the impedance, it does dip down to 3.1 ohm at about 150 hertz. The minimum EPDR is 1.4 ohm. I don't know that if you're going to be able to run an AVR without potentially running into power supply issues, because it dips down in that region between 80 to 100 hertz. Now, if you were crossing the speaker over at 100 hertz or something like that, then maybe that would alleviate some of it. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm just trying to say you're probably going to want a dedicated amplifier for the speaker. Check with the manufacturer of your AVR. show them this graphic and ask them what they think. There is a resonance just under 300 hertz. I didn't really hear that in my listening, but I'm pointing it out because it is there. This is the on-axis response. Sensitivity is measured at 87 decibels from 300 hertz to 3 kilohertz. F3, 56 hertz, F10, 30 hertz. Again, I don't think you're going to have any issue getting down to 40 hertz in your room, but that will depend on placement in your room. Look at how smooth the response is. I mean, it's practically within 1.5 decibels for the majority of the response. But here's this breakup that's right around 13 kilohertz, give or take. And then on the low end, I mentioned that there seemed to be a little bit of a mid-bass discrepancy, maybe between the mid-range and the mid-bass area. And if I had to guess, I think this is what I was hearing. But when I put the speaker about 2 feet from the wall, I didn't really have that issue. If you move it out 3 feet from the wall or further, then you might find that you're going to need to bump up the mid-bass and your tonal balance, maybe a decibel, maybe 2 decibels, just depending, again, on your preference, your room, and the overall positioning. This is the CEA 2034 data set. Everything looks good. The sound power does show a little bit of a bump in this 1 to 2 kilohertz region, shows a little bit of a dip in the directivity, but the early reflections directivity, the one that I really personally pay more attention to than just about anything else, look how smooth this is. I'm going to point it out to you here in this line. Look how smooth this is. Now, around 7 kilohertz, 6 kilohertz or so, we can see that the directivity increases and deviates from this line that I've drawn. So the line that I drew was basically just saying, here's the general trend of the ERDI going through this region. But why does it increase? Well, that's due to the horizontal radiation kind of collapsing in. Above about 7 kilohertz, it starts to collapse in. So here's my theory. And I haven't verified this. I probably should, but it's just a working theory and it's fun to think about stuff like this. At least I'm telling you it's a theory and not fact. I wonder if they didn't leave the high frequency bump here, because I know that they have to be aware of it at Wharfedale. I mean, they measure speakers, so I know they have to be aware of it. I wonder if they didn't leave it there in some way to contrast, I guess, the increasing directivity of that ribbon tweeter. And it shows up in the estimated in-room response. If this bump wasn't here, this would fall off more quickly. So my assumption, again, is that they knew that that bump was there. They left that bump there, and now they achieve a more smooth, higher frequency estimated in-room response. And if I draw a trend line for roughly how I heard the speaker, this kind of gives you an idea. I say that the EIR smoothed despite peaking 13 kilohertz thanks to increasing DI. So we're going to see that in a little bit on the contour plots. Mid-bass is ever so slightly lower, right, compared to the mid-range, just ever so slightly. Placement near a wall can help, but overall may not be worth it. Simple tonal balance will make this fine if desired. Again, that's my subjective take. Play around with it, but this to me looks really, really good. This is the horizontal contour plot. How even is the radiation compared to the on-axis response? It's about plus or minus 70 degrees throughout until around, again, 6-7 kilohertz right in this region. And then it narrows up from about plus or minus 70 to this region is about plus or minus 50, and then just keeps narrowing more and more because that radiation of that tweeter is collapsing more inward. I think that's why they left that higher frequency bump in there. What about vertically? Do you have to sit on axis with the tweeter? Well, with the three-way design, you don't always have to do that, but with ribbon tweeters, because the distance is so large between the top and the bottom of them, usually they have a more narrow vertical region. And we actually see evidence of that in this data right here. Again, my reference axis was in the middle of the tweeter. It looks like if I'd adjusted it a little bit lower, it would have actually performed a little bit better. And I'm pointing it out here so you all see it. Through the crossover region, you're about plus or minus 15 to 20 degrees, give or take. I really wouldn't deviate too much from that middle of the tweeter line. You can maybe go a little bit below it toward the bottom of the tweeter if you're like looking at it. But as far as any wild deviations, stay within that tweeter axis. Distortion at 86 decibels 1 meter, 96 decibels 1 meter. Distortion is low, except for on the lowest end, but it's a 6.5-inch woofer, so I'm not really surprised by the distortion creeping up higher here. However, I do want to note that it is third order harmonic distortion, so that may catch your attention as far as data goes. Audibly though, I couldn't point to anything and say that's distortion. More importantly is the multitone distortion. Multitone distortion, full band at 96 decibels, my max. It's 8.95 volt input to the speaker. 96 decibels at 1 meter, is below my personal 3% distortion threshold. What happens if you cross this thing over to a subwoofer brick wall filter at 80 hertz? This is what you get. I'm going to go back to full range, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and then 80 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Notice that the mid-range distortion drops a good bit. I mean, almost 10 decibels. That's basically about 3% to about 1% distortion difference. Are you going to hear that? Maybe. Maybe if you were sitting intently and solely listening for it and you have the right music to listen to, maybe you might hear it. But in my listening, again, there was nothing that I could point to that says, yes, I heard this sound. Compression is an area, though, where we start to see that the woofer starts to give out. And that's really kind of what I was talking about earlier when I said that I was listening at really high volume. When I was listening to bass that had notes in the 30 to 35 hertz region, I could definitely hear that woofer having trouble. Sometimes, if you were able to just listen to the mid bass only, you would hear that mid bass giving up even sooner. But because you've got mid-range and high frequency masking that effect, you don't hear it so much. And really, that's what we're seeing here in this purple. I should have heard the mid-bass giving up at the higher output levels at a different frequency, but because I have mid-range and high frequency playing so well, they're not being limited or compressed, then I don't really have that issue. At 96 decibels at 1 meter, which is 93 decibels at 4 meters, a good solid 20 decibels of dynamic range, there's no issue with the speaker. That wraps it up for this review of the Wharfedale Aura 2, a speaker that I wholeheartedly recommend. I think sounds fantastic, and I honestly would have no problem owning this speaker whatsoever. I'm actually going to now request and see if I can get the Tower speaker or maybe the Elysian speakers, because I'm really curious how those speakers sound. I did not expect this speaker to sound nearly as good as it does. I'm just really genuinely impressed. At $2,500, it's probably one of the better value speakers out there, which I know it's hard to say that something that is thousands of dollars is a value, but compared to what else is out there, the overall finish of this speaker, the overall timbre, the sound, the neutrality, the radiation, the bass composure, the bass depth, it's a damn good speaker. So, with that said, I'm out. If you're interested in supporting this channel in any sort of way, you can do so at patreon.com/Erin's Audio Corner. Alternatively, I will put an affiliate link for this speaker at the bottom below, which, man, that sounds like I'm straight up shilling the thing because I gave it such high praise, but you saw all the data, all those things jive with the things that I subjectively like. So it really shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who kind of knows what I like and sees the data that, yeah, I like the speaker, and I'm willing to bet you probably will too. I will talk to y'all later. Take care. Peace.